Alright, so we have intensity. We know intensity is the most important thing. Intensity. Oh, fuck. Green. It's ugly color. Okay, so we have intensity. Intensity is the most important thing. It's what we care about the most, whatever. How do you measure intensity? Now, there's really two ways to measure intensity. You can measure intensity by something called the heart rate reserve, which isn't really gone over. It's more of a clinical exercise, more of a clinical intensity, more using a clinical setting. But mostly you measure intensity by percentage of your max heart rate. So a certain percentage, okay. All right, better size. Had to change the size a little bit. Okay, so you measure max heart rate by the intensity of, you measure intensity by the percentage of your max heart rate. And it's a certain range usually. And this gives you like a certain percentage and tells you to stay between this range of your max heart rate. Now, how do you calculate your max heart rate? It's a good question. Okay, so to measure your max heart rate, you use something called the Carbonin formula. I'm sure it's created by some dude named Carbonin. Carbonin formula. Now, the Carbonin formula is a very simple formula. All it really is 220 minus your age. This gives you max heart rate. Rough estimate. So let's take for me, for example. I will be 124, so I'll be 196. This is my max heart rate. Theoretically, based on the formula, this is probably not my max heart rate if I was to go out and run to my maximum. I might be able to reach a little less than 196, maybe a little bit more, I don't know. Whatever I pass out on is most likely my max heart rate. Okay, so 196. So you take the max heart rate, 220 minus your age, whatever, and then you multiply it by a certain intensity. So say we want to find 50% of my max heart rate. Well, that's actually very simple. I just divide it by 2. Let's say 60%. I want to find 60% of my max heart rate. Also very simple if you know basic math. But say I want to find 60% of my max heart rate. What I would do is 220 minus age times 0.6 decimal. And that is, don't feel like doing the math. Okay, so you simply do 220 minus your age, or 196. My age times 60%, let's get 117.6. Whoa. Okay, so, erase that. So 117.6 is 50% of my max heart, is 60% of my max heart rate. 60% of my max heart rate. Now it's very hard to tell someone just exercise at 117.6 beats per minute. So it's usually a certain range they give you. So let's say 60 to 70% of my max heart rate. So I would also do 196 times 0.7. 0.7, and that's 132.2. Now usually no one cares about decimals. Okay, so 60 to 70% of my max heart rate is between 117 and 132 beats per minute. So it's a very simple formula. Just do 220 minus a person's age, and you times it twice by the percent, by 0.6, and then do it again by 0.7, and you get a range. And this is what they want to reach out. So 90% of max heart rate will be 196 divided by 0.9. And this is how you find someone's intensity and what intensity they're working out at. Now, the next thing is a very simple definition. I don't know why we have to go over it. It's task specific. Very simple. If you want to improve in running, run. If you want to improve in biking, bike. If you want to improve in swimming, swim. Running will cause improvements in biking and cycling just because running is close to cycling. It's a cardiovascular exercise. It still uses your cardiovascular system, but it's not too similar to running. So you will get gains, but not a lot. So task specificity means if you want to improve in something, obviously do it. If you want to improve in biking, bike. Don't run, just bike. There's really no point around it. You can't be an elite cyclist if you don't cycle. And now we'll go over, okay, so we covered very basic Carbonin formula, how to find heart rate, percentage. Now we'll go over a very fun topic. We'll simply go over something called lactic threshold. Now, if you remember all the way back from the first test, lactic acid, anaerobic respiration, everything. Now, glucose goes through glycolysis, goes to the TCA, goes through glycolysis. And then when it goes through glycolysis, you have pyruvates. So going back to metabolism over here, now pyruvate can either go to lactate, or it can enter the mitochondria and go into the TCA cycle. Into the TCA cycle, it's termed aerobic respiration. If it forms lactate, it's because not technically you ran out of oxygen, but because you need energy so fast, so you form lactate and get 2 ATP, can continue the cycle, etc. Now the thing about lactate is when lactate breaks down, it releases a hydrogen ion, and thus hydrogen ions are very acidic, and they lower the pH of the body. Now this is good and all because you get energy very fast. You're probably saying, what is the bad point of this? Okay, so I have an acidic body, I lower the pH. What's bad about this? Who cares? Now, the reason we care is because if you lower the acidity, or actually raise the acidity, lower the pH. Now, if you lower the pH, what actually happens is our muscles stop contracting because they contract through a certain range of pH, homeostasis. So, against the physiology, now your body normally clears lactate. You normally clear lactate because you always produce lactate, really. So you normally clear this. You have a buffer system that clears this. So you have a buffer system. Now, what lactic threshold is a certain value that everyone has. Lactic threshold is the value of when you produce more lactate than you can clear. So you produce more lactate than you can clear, because everyone can clear a certain amount of lactate, and that's no problem. But once you produce more than you can clear, then that starts being a problem, because then your acidity starts rising, your pH starts decreasing, and when your muscles are this acidic, they actually stop contracting, burning sensation, not good. You can't continue exercising no matter how, you just can't do it. Even if you physically push yourself, you just can't do it. So that's your lactic threshold. So when you produce more lactate than you clear. Now, how can you use this information to kind of improve? You can using this knowledge to improve and get ahead of the competition. And what you can do is, if you train at your lactic threshold. Now, if you train, now remember the body is extremely, it adapts to the environment. It adapts to pretty much anything. The body is pretty amazing with that. So if you train at your lactic threshold, your body will get better at clearing lactate, so your lactic threshold will increase. And if your lactic threshold increases, you can exercise longer at a certain intensity before you stop exercising and start producing lactate faster than you can clear. Now what that means is, now say your lactic threshold, I'll use real numbers or the real units of what it would be in. Now say your lactic threshold is 5 millimoles. Okay, so your lactic threshold is 5 millimoles. So that what that means is once you start, you can produce up to, so you can produce 4.9 perfectly fine, and your body clears it. But once you start producing 5.1 millimoles, 5.2, 5.3, whatever, you start producing more than 5.0 millimoles, your body can't clear the above 5 because that's its threshold. So your body starts accumulating lactic, and when this happens, you start having a burning sensation in your legs. Your muscles start locking up because your body is so acidic, and when this happens, acidity is bad for the muscles, so your brain recognizes this and stops exercising because acidity is bad. Now, when you train at your lactic threshold, so you have this knowledge of 5 millimoles. There's a bunch of formulas out there in running books and cycling books and whatnot, and people have done the math, so they know kind of the intensities to work out in. But when you train at your lactic threshold, your body adapts and gets better at clearing lactic. So maybe next time you can produce, your lactic threshold is 5.2 millimoles. So you can produce 5.2 and still not develop any lactic, start producing excess lactic in the blood. So your training increased 5.2. So say you train for 6 more months, and now your lactic threshold, we'll use probably a realistic value, increases to 6.0. So now you can produce much more lactic acid before you start feeling the effects of lactic and have to stop exercising. Say you're an elite athlete, you train for years, whatever. Now well, this isn't really a true lactic threshold. It might be actually. Say you're an elite athlete, you train for years, and now your lactic threshold is 8. That's pretty realistic. I don't think you can get above that. Well, it's not really recorded. Now say your lactic threshold is 8.0. That means you can train much harder than the athlete that has a 5.0 lactic acid before you start feeling the effects of lactic acid. So obviously, if you can do this, you have a benefit to exercising, and you can easily outrun or outcycle or outperform this guy. Because this guy, when he gets to 8 millimoles of lactic acid, he's going to be done. His body will be so acidic that he can't run anymore, he can't move, he's fried, he wants to stop and pass out, and he's probably already passed out at this point. Whereas this guy, he's perfectly fine. He hasn't produced any excess lactic. He's just jogging, whatever, he's fine. So training at your lactic threshold increases your, it pretty much increases your performance. You're more likely to increase. And the actual lactic threshold isn't a certain intensity. It's all this shit is defined in books, like cycling, running books on running schedules, like Jack Daniel's running formula, or cycling books, where they have all these formulas where they tell you train at this intensity for this amount of time, and this is your lactic threshold training. So all that stuff is defined already. So it's not a certain intensity, it's just, well, it is, but it's not a certain number. But essentially, higher lactic threshold is, you can increase it with training. That's the main benefit to training at lactic threshold. So this is really the best training to do. Best training. Because you can increase your VO2, that's true. And if you have a higher VO2, that doesn't necessarily mean you're in better shape than the dude with the lower VO2. Because if it did mean that, then there wouldn't be any point to running cycling rate. There wouldn't be any point to races, right? Because you can just say, well, this dude's VO2 is 60. This dude's VO2 is 58. So the 60 guy wins. You guys don't have to run. There's no point in having a race. You can just look at numbers. But unfortunately, it's not that clear cut, fortunately. Because there's other things, there's like lactic threshold going into it. There's motivation. There's personal character. Not really character. Motivation, desire, blah, 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 fire, passion. So that's lactic threshold. Best training ever. Lactic threshold, just training the lactic, increasing your lactic threshold so you can train more until acid takes over your body and makes you stop exercising.